Chapter 31. The thoughts about God came to me after a long stay in the ashram, at the end of my period of silence, called Muna. Western beliefs imposed on us and assimilated from our childhood, such as the idea of an anthropomorphic highest being, were not so easily transformed into less naive and deeper conceptions. Although some years before my coming to India, the grosser forms of religious prejudices had already been discarded. I mean by this the formal, not the spiritual side that's present in every religion. Yet their discarding proved quite insufficient in the atmosphere of Maharshi. Being near him, one feels the presence of God as a matter of course. No arguments or proofs are necessary. It is extremely difficult to express in words what the mind can never grasp. The sage continually repeats that God can be known only subjectively, never as something outside ourselves, but rather as our own real life, our own innermost core or being. Happily, at one of my meditations at the feet of the saint, just before closing the gates of the mind for the exclusion of all thoughts, I remembered the words of the Master. All religious and philosophical systems can lead men only to a certain point, always the same, to the emotional, mental conception of God. And what is most important, meriting the name of true achievement lies beyond it, in realization. We do not then think about the highest being as dwelling somewhere in heaven, or as the primary cause or beginning of all things, the primal movement that creates the universe, or in any other clear and comforting mental conception. For none of these speculations bring us nearer to reality. As Maharshi says, we should experience God in a more realistic way every day, every minute, every second. In other words, we should feel being in Him, as this is the truth. He is the only reality, the basic principle of everything we see and experience. The mind is unable to grasp this simple truth that God is really in everything, and not in some chosen forms only, in some peculiar physical, mental, or emotional phenomena. That He dwells in Maharshi as well as in each one of these primitive Dravidian villagers who sit in the hall, whose thinking processes are quite childish compared with those of the Brahmin meditating nearby. That He is in the refreshing evening breeze, and equally in the black mosquitoes which annoy me even in the temple hall. That all kinds of deep-sea monsters which ruthlessly devour each other, as well as the silent prayers of devotees sitting at the feet of the sage, breathe the same life of the Most High, and that nothing, literally no thing, is outside His consciousness. Hence all is as it is and should be. Nothing can go against His will or exist outside Him. The unruffled peace of the Master, the never disturbed calm, have not these their source in an experienced knowledge of these facts? Yes, it must be so. If it is true that nothing in this world can be alien to me, nor can I ever be lonely. And usually it is this loneliness that terrifies people so greatly. I now find the explanation of the overwhelming buzz one feels in meditation, as well as a sense of immortality, which penetrates into one's consciousness slowly, gradually, imperceptibly, yet with unshakable certitude. If I am all that is, how can I lose life, which is in truth the core of everything? All these thoughts, however speedily they flash through my consciousness, begin to be tiring. Is it always necessary to keep on proving to oneself and repeating indefinitely that 2 and 2 make 4, when one is now at his very feet? And Maharshi says strictly and emphatically, true life begins when all forms are discarded, all thoughts transcended, and only the real self remains. But this self is nothing in common with that which is called I on the physical plane of being. This illusory I sits abandoned there at the column, its life having taken for the time being the vegetative mode when the great breath is turned inwards to the self. And the real self is something infinitely greater, more subtle and free. It is in all, and all is in Him. That is God, consciousness. When we understand this, we begin to see that in truth, every being seeks, all but unconsciously, its source, which is the highest. The eyes are then opened to the meaning of many inspired words of great poets and mystics, and see their hidden longing to be always turned inwards to the same one source. O world, why in this midst of your ghastly, unreal existence are you unable to see the truth that there is not and cannot be any other goal? Love and devotion for the highest, the One, is then born spontaneously, with no questionings nor inquiries, but with full awareness that this is in the natural order of things, that everything is as it should be, that all His decrees are always just and right. If we are unable to perceive this, it is no fault of the sun, who sheds his rays always and everywhere, but of the blind man who does not see them. The capacity of seeing the sun is born in the heart, not in the brain. This seeing has nothing in common with the ordinary earthly perception, like, I am here and He is there. Such a mental concept is a definite obstacle to meditation, which can give us the first glimpse of the sunbeams. We should not try to pull down the sun, a vain attempt, to our own level. But on the contrary, we must step out of our small I and go forward to meet the light. That comparison, although clumsy and utterly inadequate, may reflect something of the attitude in which we have to start our battle for life, real life. All that can be said about the stages of our search for God is contained in its fullness in silence. Out of this silence, one may draw endless pictures and definitions, but unavoidably they will all be imperfect, giving no adequate idea of the essence of the process. It would probably be wiser to plunge ourselves into silence instead of listening to secondhand experiences of those who, in a greater or lesser degree, have learned this art of silence. For God speaks to us in silence, but we rarely allow the silence to come or listen for Him to speak. For we still do not know. In our ignorance, we do not usually like silence. It bores us. We cannot imagine life without thought. But this illusory existence is not life at all. Rather, it is death. For death is the unavoidable end of all forms, particularly in the case of such an imperfect one as our little self or ego. We close our eyes and do not want to see this obvious and somewhat terrible truth. In vain is this attitude which leads us nowhere. Just as a leaf torn from a tree can never return to it, so our transitory form will never be able to express our real self. A great teacher said clearly, "No man can serve two masters, God and Mammon." In meditation, one can perceive instances of God's intervention, even in our daily lives. Things which were unnoticed before become obvious. And our hearts are filled with immeasurable love, devotion, and gratitude. Then we are nearing that state which Maharshi spoke of as a daily communion with God. This is the goal and the summit. But in our immediate future, we shall probably gain only now and then some flashes of light and not yet be able to abide permanently in Him. I fully realize that the saint whom I am facing dwells uninterruptedly in the orb of light. This light is utterly different from any physical one we know. It is pouring even through closed eyelids. That which was left by me down there at the temple column has its eyes dosed and certainly can see nothing. It is soundless and dumb like a corpse, but there is the joyous and certain hope of resurrection. I hear, as from a distance, the ashram gong.